As Donovan once sang, "I'm just mad about saffron," and so was medieval Europe. The most expensive spice was all over the cookbooks of the Middle Ages. And today we're making a 14th century version of saffron rice, which came with the rather dramatic name, rice of flesh. So thank you to Bright Cellars for sponsoring this video as we discuss saffron, this time on Tasting History. So today's recipe comes from that old chestnut, The Form of Curry, an English cookbook from the court of Richard II written around 1390. Now the recipe is really just for a fairly simple saffron rice, but the book calls it rice of flesh. But despite its name, which translates to meat rice, there is no meat in this rice except for a bit of chicken stock. What it means is that it shouldn't be served during Lent or fasting days, which there were many of in medieval Europe. Rather, it should be served with meat. Rice of flesh. Take rice and wash it clean and put in an earthen pot with good broth and let it cook well. Afterward, take almond milk and add it and color it with saffron and salt and serve it forth. Rather like saffron rice today, albeit with almond milk, which was another very popular ingredient in the Middle Ages. What got me was that it has you add the saffron and almond milk after the rice is cooked. At least that's kind of what I'm reading in the recipe. And I tried that, and it doesn't really work because it doesn't end up coloring the rice properly. And that's the point of adding the saffron, was to color it, or what they call indoor foods, which was a very popular thing to do with all sorts of colors in the Middle Ages. So I'm going to be cooking it with the rice so that we get that color like it's meant to be. And that's kind of the problem with most cookbooks from the Middle Ages, is what's actually on the page is maybe not necessarily what is actually meant to be happening. And that was because the way that recipes were written, it was like a game of telephone. It would be kind of like the chef talking to the cook, who would then talk back to the chef, who would then talk to one or more scribes over a period of days, possibly multiple chefs talking to multiple scribes to write down the recipe. So a lot of things don't make sense, but that's okay. That's part of the fun. But for this recipe, what you'll need is 2 cups or 350 grams of white rice, 3 cups or 700 milliliters of chicken broth, a large pinch or about a half teaspoon of saffron threads. Now we are going to talk about saffron later, but I can already hear people saying, that's a lot of saffron, that's going to be a really expensive dish. Yes, it is the most expensive spice in the world, coming in right now at about $10 a gram for the really good stuff. But in 1 gram of saffron, that's a lot of saffron because it's such a light thing. So the amount that I'm using for this is probably like $2 or $3 worth, which, yeah, it's a lot, but it's not going to break the bank. 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup or 235 milliliters of almond milk. Now you can make your own almond milk. I've done it a few times here on the show. I'll put a link up here to the Dillagrout episode where I made it just a couple months ago. But you can also just buy it as long as the only ingredients are almonds and water. You don't want any flavorings, that's not good. Now, in the Middle Ages, it was often actually made with wine, but if you make this with wine, even if it's white wine, it ends up kind of changing the color, so make it with water if you're going to make your own. But even if we're not using wine to make our almond milk, that doesn't mean we can't enjoy a glass of wine with our rice, a glass of wine, which I got from today's sponsor, Bright Cellars. I love Bright Cellars because they keep me on my toes when it comes to the wines that they send me. I started with the simple 7-question quiz that lets Bright Cellars know your taste preferences, and then they sent me a selection. Then I got to rate those wines, and so the next box was even more tuned in to what I wanted. Personally, my favorite thing is that they send you these cards on each wine that you get, which gives you kind of some information about the wine before you're actually drinking it. I've got Tetrachroma Pinot Noir, which is from California. It has vanilla, red currant, and strawberry. Bushtelly, which is a Cabernet Sauvignon from Australia. I just like the name Bushtelly. That's my terrible Australian accent right there. And then Obscura Zinfandel. I love a Zinfandel. This is strawberry, plum, raspberry. I think I might have to go with the Tetrachroma Pinot Noir. That's juicy. That's the word I would use. It's juicy. Oh, I can taste that vanilla in there. That's going to go really well with our saffron rice. Now, Bright Cellars is giving Tasting History viewers 50% off of their first 6-bottle box, so just click the link in the description to take your quiz and sign up today. Now, with your glass of wine in hand, go ahead and crush your saffron and add some of the almond milk into the mortar to let it diffuse for about 5 minutes. During that time, you can wash your rice and set it in a pot with the chicken broth, the rest of the almond milk, and the salt. Finally, add the almond milk that has the saffron in it and stir everything together. Then set it over a high heat and bring to a boil. Let it boil for about 30 seconds, then reduce the heat to low and cover the pot, letting the rice cook for 20 minutes. Now, while that cooks, let's take a look at why medieval Europe was just mad about saffron. I love that song, obviously. I love Donovan, and if you don't know who Donovan is, go look him up. Saffron, the red gold of Persia, or Spain, or wherever it happens to be growing, I suppose. Now, it was often the most expensive spice in antiquity, and is still the most expensive spice today, but unlike other spices, which were expensive due to the fact that they had to come all the way around the world, at least if you were in Europe, saffron grew pretty much all over Europe for most of the Middle Ages. What made it so precious is how labor-intensive it was and still is to obtain. It comes from the flower of the Crocus sativus. The flowers need to be hand-picked between September and October, and they have to be picked within just a few hours of the blossom opening, otherwise the stigma will dry up and kind of become unusable. And it's those stigmas, stigma? It's those stigmas that are, well, that's the whole ball game, because that's where all of the color and the flavor are. Once they're picked and the stigma is removed, then the stigma is dried, and that is saffron. Now, the 3 stigmas in each flower are connected to a style, which is much longer and weighs quite a bit, but it has no flavor and it has very, very little color. But it's often in inferior quality saffrons to bulk it up. So if your piece of saffron is that long, that ain't saffron. Now, I had planned to do the entire history of saffron, but it turns out that it is a rather robust topic, and so I am focusing on medieval Europe because they just love their saffron so much so that in the form of curry, where we're getting our recipe from today, it's in 40% of the recipes. Now, it's thought that after disappearing from Europe following the fall of Rome, saffron, probably called zafaran, which comes from an old Arabic word meaning yellow, was brought up through Spain by the Moors. After crossing the Strait of Gibraltar in 711, the Umayyad Caliph conquered much of the Visigothic kingdom of the Iberian Peninsula. And they brought a whole wealth of learning to Europe, as well as a brand new cuisine, which included saffron. Some believe that it even made its way as far north as Poitiers in France, when in 732 Charles Martel pushed the Umayyad invasion back at the Battle of Tours. Now, it's not known that it was growing there that early, but definitely by the early 1200s it was being cultivated in France, and not long after, it was being cultivated all around Europe. In England, for instance, it was grown throughout the southeast part of the kingdom, most famously in a town called Chipping Walden, which in a medieval marketing campaign changed its name to Saffron Walden. And the marketing campaign clearly worked, because in the 16th century, the clergyman William Harrison said, "As the saffron of England is the most excellent of all others, that which groweth about Saffron Walden in the edge of Essex surmounteth all the rest, and therefore beareth worthily the higher price." Though much of the saffron in Saffron Walden wasn't actually for eating, but rather for dyeing cloth, the dye works there being established no later than 1359. And it's possible that Henry VIII, who in 1514 granted the town a charter decorated with the saffron crocus, had his clothes dyed yellow there. This wasn't long before he decided that other people, namely the Irish, couldn't wear any shirt, smock, kercher, bendel, knickercher, mocket, or linen cap colored or dyed with saffron. He was all about controlling how people dressed and wore their clothes, especially the Irish, because he also said, "No person shall be shorn or shaven above the ears, or have or use any hair growing on the upper lips, called or named a cromiel." Do you think he means me? Do I need to shave? Man, he was a jerk. Also, a little note about Saffron Walden, it is the location of Audley End. Anyone who watches Mrs. Crocombe will know that Audley End is where she works. Now, while England was growing their own saffron, or else importing it from Spain or France, depending on who they were not at war with at any given time, other areas of Europe also tried their hand at growing the stuff. One was the town of Basel in Switzerland, who, after having a large shipment stolen by a group of nobles, started a 3-month war with the thieves known as the Saffron War. Now, it ended in them getting their saffron back, but to stop it from happening again, they decided to start growing their own, and they did so with some success for about 10 years before they gave the venture up. Not entirely sure why, but it's probably because it's just a lot of work. Instead, even with thieving nobles, it was just easier to get it from Nuremberg. For centuries, whether coming north from Italy or from the east via the Venetian spice trade, Nuremberg was where pretty much all of Central Europe's saffron was sold. And the trade was controlled by just a few families, one of which was the Imhoff family, and one member of that family was named Katharina Lemmel. She was heavily involved in the business before deciding to become a nun. But just because she had become a bride of Christ, that didn't mean she was ready to give up her saffron. In several letters to her cousin Hans, she has him send pounds of saffron to the convent each year, mostly to be used during Lent while they were singing and having to stay up late praying, because saffron in sufficient quantities could be used as a stimulant. No coffee, no tea, use saffron. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are still a lot of knockoff saffrons or companies who kind of bulk up their saffron to make it worth more, and it was a problem in medieval Nuremberg too. Merchants were cutting their saffron with safflower, marigold, and even horsehair. But the Germans are a no-nonsense people, and so the officials of Nuremberg laid down the law with the Saffronschau, or saffron show. The Schauer would inspect the saffron, and if it was deemed unworthy, you would be punished. You could be fined, or much, much worse. On July 27, 1444, Jobst Findenken, on his way back from getting saffron in Italy, was found to have adulterated his product, and he was burned alive at the stake with his saffron, and his wife exiled from the city. There are also reports of people being buried alive with their saffron. Really messed up. But the reason for these draconian laws was because saffron was so important. It did a lot more than just dye clothes and make food gold. It was one of the most important ingredients in making the yellow inks of illuminated manuscripts, and was used to dye the hair of the ladies of Venice. In one 12th century treatise on women's cosmetics and medicine, known as the Trotula, women are instructed, for making the hair golden, take the middle bark of boxwood, flower of broom, saffron, and egg yolks, and cook them in water. Collect whatever floats on top and anoint the hair. This wasn't nearly as bad as if you wanted your hair white. For whitening the hair, catch as many bees as possible in a new pot and set it to burn, and grind with oil, and then anoint the head. And if you wanted to make your hair grow, you had to take barley and grind it up with bear fat. Like, bear fat, and then slather your head in that. But perhaps the most important use for saffron in the Middle Ages was as medicine. During the Black Death, the price shot up because it was thought to be a cure for the disease. Treatments included saffron mixed with oat flour and treacle dissolved in vinegar, then a cloth dipped in said vinegar should be pressed against the buboes. And if that was too complicated, then eating a concoction of saffron, mustard, and treacle fried in an eggshell was supposed to work wonders. In 1482, Hans Foltz, who was a master barber of Nuremberg, and later made famous as one of Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg in Wagner's opera, wrote a treatise where he prescribed saffron soaked in vinegar as a treatment for the plague. But he understood that not everyone could afford it, and so he said that you could also just take parsley and sage and put that in vinegar, and that would work just as well. Kind of sounds like he could work for my insurance company. Now, the plague was not the only thing that could be treated with saffron. It could be used to treat melancholy, or as a sedative or stimulant, or a carminative if you're feeling gassy. It could also be used as an antispasmodic, but in that case you didn't ingest it, but used it as a poultice, as in this recipe from a 15th century leech book from England. Take May butter of the amount of a nut, 5 blades of saffron, and mingle it with the butter, and put it in the navel of the sick, and take the earth that is upon a threshold, and lay it on coals of fire, and sprinkle thereon dregs of good ale. Take it up, and lay it in a linen cloth, and lay it over the butter and saffron, and so put it on the navel, and he shall be whole. Dirt from the doorway cooked with ale dregs. That seems weird, but at least butter and saffron sounds good until I tell you what May butter was. It was made in May, hence the name, and it was made with no salt. But when it was used as a medicine, it would be left out in the sun for days or weeks until it became putrid. It sapped all of the vitamin A out and kind of filled it up with vitamin D. So it actually may have worked for certain things like rickets and whatnot. And it was used all the way until the 18th century. But ew? Now what if it's not you that's sick, but let's say your pet bird? Item: when any bird of prey yawns 3 times in a row and does not look well, it is a sign that it is sick with an illness the falconers call fills, which is a worm that pricks them. To cure the bird, feed it meat in which saffron has been wrapped, and the worms will die. It also says that if you want to control these birds, especially the large peregrine falcon, you should not eat garlic, onions, or leeks. Now, a few years ago, I went a falconing in England, and the person who was in charge didn't tell me to alter my diet in any way, and I'm starting to think, well, that was a little negligent of him. Now, by the 18th century, most parts of Northern Europe had stopped growing saffron, and it was possibly due to the Little Ice Age in part, but mostly it was probably due to the fact that people could make more money in a factory than out picking crocuses. Also, the wealthy who had commanded the need for the spice found new things to spend their money on, like chocolate and coffee and vanilla and tea. And it also probably didn't help that the Puritans considered saffron and other spices in food too decadent, and they preferred a blander cuisine. But whatever the reason, outside of the countries of the Mediterranean like Spain and southern France and Italy, most of Europe doesn't use a lot of saffron today. But that's okay, just means more for me. Now, let's finish this rice of flesh. So once the rice is cooked for 20 minutes, remove the pot from the heat and let it sit for about 10 minutes to steam. Then fluff the rice and serve it forth. For added panache, feel free to bedight it with a few extra strands of saffron. And here we are, 14th century saffron rice. It smells very saffrony. I like that. You know, it kind of adds like an aromatic but bitter flavor. So you could probably tone down the saffron and maybe not add the extra on top, but I like it, so that's what I did. It almost is like a risotto. It's very liquidy. It's not liquidy, it's very moist, I guess would be the word. It's definitely not dry rice. That's really good. One more. I'm not getting any almond milk. I mean, it's such a mild flavor. The saffron kind of cuts it. You could not use almond milk, I'm thinking, and it would be exactly the same. But maybe there's a creaminess to the almond milk? I don't know. But it's absolutely wonderful. I definitely think it would go really well with some flesh or meat. Ossobuco, something like that. That's actually what it's often served with today. Make me some ossobuco. I don't have time, but if you want to make it, make it. Now earlier I mentioned that they had stopped growing saffron in Saffron Walden way back in the 1700s, but in the last few years, a couple farmers have actually started growing saffron in England again, and you can get English saffron. And they have a saffron gin from the area that I really, really want to try. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it shipped to the US, but maybe I can figure out a way, because I really want to try that gin. So thank you again to Bright Cellars for sponsoring this video, and make sure to follow me on Instagram, Tasting History with Max Miller, and I will see you next time on Tasting History. Probably gonna finish this. How could I get ossobuco? I don't know. I really want ossobuco now.